Salt-thick wind slipped through the open French doors of the waterfront dining room, tangling the fairy lights strung above long oak tables. Alara Voss sat pressed against the wall, her linen dress scratchy at her shoulders, watching her younger sister Maren float between tables like she owned every inch of Brine Harbor's most exclusive rehearsal dinner venue. The Mercer family's wealth hung soft and unmissable in the polished silver wine carafes, the custom-embossed napkins, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing calm Pacific surf. This was Maren's moment. 2 years of careful wedding planning, a fiancé from the town's most respected real estate line, a room full of wealthy relatives ready to fawn over the perfect bride-to-be. Alara had spent the whole night shrinking into her chair, careful not to draw eyes, her old Navy SR tattoo hidden under 3 layers of thin fabric. She'd known better than to come, but their mother Lila had begged, said skipping would look petty, that Maren needed her big sister there to complete the picture. Plates of grilled salmon and roasted root vegetables sat half-eaten across the table, when Maren glided over, champagne flute glinting, and draped one arm loose over Alara's shoulder. Her smile was bright, sharp, the kind Alara had learned years ago meant a joke aimed straight at her expense. The chatter around them dimmed a little as nearby Mercer guests turned their attention over, curious about the bride's quiet older sister. Maren leaned in, voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding family to catch every word. No warmth underneath the cheer. Hey everyone, I almost forgot the best story about my sister here. Alara spent 4 years running around the ocean with the Navy rescue swimmers, right? She's got this ridiculous service nickname everyone back then called her. Come on, tell them what it was. Alara's throat tightened instantly. She'd begged Maren a dozen times not to bring up the call sign. Not here. Not in front of strangers who wouldn't understand the weight behind it. To Maren, it was just a silly throwaway label. Something loud and unrefined to poke fun at. Proof Alara's past was too rough for this polished wedding crowd. Maren squeezed her shoulder a little hard, tilting her, egging her on, eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction as the table leaned in to listen. Just it, Maren pressed, a laugh edging her. Don't be shy. We're all family. A dozen pairs of eyes locked on Maren's gentle fiancé shifted awkwardly in it, glancing between the two sitters, clearly sensing the tension but unsure how to stand. Lila stared down at her salad, pretending not to notice, the same way she always did when Maren picked Alara apart. Alara's fingers curled tight around her waters, cool condensation seeping into her palms. She saw no way out without drawing more in, no quick exit to dodge the humiliation Maren had stayed for her. She exhaled slow, and spoke the single word she'd hoped would never leave her mouth at this dinner. The second the name landed in air, everything heard. From the far end table, 74-year-old Jasper Mercer froze mid-sip of wine. He'd been quiet all evening, a stooped, silver-haired man with weathered hands crisscrossed by thin wires, keeping mostly to himself while the younger Mercers laughed and toasted the upcoming. No one at the table had paid him much mind beyond polite. He was just Hale's reclusive great-uncle, the retired old veteran who rarely joined family rings. Now his glass hit the table with a sharp, resin clink that cut clean through all conversation. He said it slow, deliberate, knuckles white or stem, every line on his face hardening like he'd just heard a storm roar back to life after half a century of silence. The room silent. The distant crash of ocean waves outside was the only for a beat, fairy lights humming. Jasper's gaze locked directly on Alara first, then snapped to Maren, his graveled, rough from decades of salt air and unseen grief, loud enough for every guest within 10 feet. You owe an apology. Maren's grin dropped off her face in an instant, confusion melting straight into defense irritation. She pulled her arm on Alara's shoulder, stacked slightly, brows furrowed like Jasper had just ruined her perfectly orchestrated. He sat forward, mouth parted, confused, glancing from his uncle to fiancé. No clue what could have triggered such a sharp demand over a silly old. Leela finally lifted her head, rushing to smooth things over before drama stained Maren's rehearsal dinner, her tone placating and quick to done. Jasper, I'm sure it's nothing that over. Just a please. Nothing. Jasper cut her off without breaking eye with Maren, his shoulders tight with a weight no one at that table had seen before. His scarred fingers tapped once against the tabletop, a sharp, insistent rhythm. That name isn't a joke to dinner. You had no business pushing her to say embarrass her. And you will apologize before the night. Maren sputtered, cheeks flushing hot with embarrassment and anger both, crossing her arms tight over her silk wedding rehearsal gown. All the polished poise she'd spent months curating frayed at the edges, her voice rising sharp enough to carry across the entire dining room. I don't see why I need to apologize for dumb Navy nickname. It's just a silly mon up years ago. Only joking. Why is everyone acting like I said something terrible? No guest could answer her. They traded confused, uncertain glances, murmurs rippling soft through the room as strangers wondered what hidden history could turn a harmless tease handoff. Alara sat rigid in her chair, heart hammering against her ribs, staring at Jasper's face. She could feel every hair burning into her skin, could taste the salt of old ocean storms on the back of her throat. Realizing in that second that Marin's lip attempt to humiliate her had unearthed something far bigger than I would have predicted. The calm, picture-perfect wedding weekend Marin had shattered completely, irreversible, before the main core plates were even cleared away. Jasper leaned forward across the table, was resting on the wood, his gaze unflinching on Marin's delirious frame. The stretched thick again, ocean wind through the French doors, and he spoke heavy, each word hanging heavy in the quiet room for every person gathered there to absorb. You have no word cost people. The dinner never recovered its easy glow after Jasper's demand hung in the air. Guests split into quiet, huddled conversations, eyes darting between Marin, Elara, and the old veteran at the far end of the table. Marin refused to utter a single word of apology, spinning on her heel and storming toward the venue's back patio, the second Jasper looked away, her silk gown swishing sharply against the hardwood floor. Lila scrambled after her without a backward glance at Elara, muttering about ruined moods and wedding stress, leaving Elara alone amid a table of awkward, staring strangers. Hale lingered a minute, his face tight with conflict, offering Elara a weak, apologetic shrug before he hurried out to soothe his furious fiancée. Jasper didn't chase any of them. He simply refilled his wine glass slowly, his gaze drifting out the French doors toward the churning gray Pacific, the scar on his left wrist catching the string light glow. Elara hesitated for nearly 10 minutes, picking at the cold salmon on her plate, debating if she should slip out and avoid more confrontation entirely. Guilt tangled heavy in her chest. She'd never imagined her old call sign would crack open something so raw for a stranger's family, and she worried she'd only added fuel to Marin's resentment. She pushed back her chair and crossed the dining room to stand beside Jasper's chair, voice soft enough not to draw nearby listeners. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I never meant to bring up anything painful tonight. If I'd known..." He cut her off with a slow shake of his head. Not unkind, just worn thin by years of quiet hurt. His weathered eyes settled on her, sharp and knowing, like he could read the saltwater trauma etched under her skin, the same quiet weight he carried himself. "This isn't your fault. Your sister knew exactly what she was doing, pushing you to say, putting your old service on display for cheap laughs. Don't carry her cruelty as your mistake." He paused, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass, and his tone turned gray, a quiet warning tucked beneath the words. "All I'll tell you right now is this. Ask her why she thought that name was something to mock. The answer matters more than you realize." Before Elara could press him for more, Clara Mercer, Hale's her, wandered over to gently tug Jasper's arm, explaining the rest of the family needed his presence for group photos by the dock. He gave Elara one final heavy look before he stood and followed Clara outside, leaving her with nothing but vague, haunting words and 1,000 unanswered questions buzzing in her. Elara waited another 20 minutes before stepping out onto the patio to find her sister and her. The evening breeze bit at her bare arms, carrying the sharp tang of salt and citrus. Marin stood pressed against the wooden railing, her cheek still blooded. Lila patting her back and murmuring reassurance, every word framed to dismiss Elara's side of the conflict before Elara even opened. When Marin spotted her approaching, she whirled around, voice sharp and ungiving, no trace of the sweet bride persona she'd put all night. "Are you happy now? You ruined the whole rehearsal dinner with one stupid word. Uncle Jasper barely speaks to anyone, and now he's furious at me, all because you couldn't just laugh it off like a normal." Elara blinked, stunned by the complete reversal of blame. "I didn't force you to drag my nickname out in front of one. You wanted to embarrass me? I'm king." Marin snapped, hands up. "It's just a dumb Navy nickname, not some secret. Why does everyone act like I committed a crime for teasing my own sister? Mom's right. You've always been too sensitive about your time in the service. You treat that 4 years like it's some untouchable hole." Lila nodded in agreement, her weary, desperate to smooth over the friction before the wedding weekend spiraled further. "Marin's just nervous, Elara. Can't you let this her sake? This wedding means nothing to her. Don't sour it with..." The familiar hollow ache settled deep in her. The same ache she'd carried since teenagers. Her mother always prioritizing Marin's comfort over his hurt, writing every jab, every public humiliation as simple stress or harmless teasing. She didn't waste breath arguing further. She turned and walked away without another word, leaving the two of them bickering quietly on the patio railing, and drove straight to the small beach apartment she rented a 10-minute. Tess, her oldest friend and former SAR dive partner, answered the door still wrapped in faded navy sweatpants, a half-empty soda table. Elara collapsed onto the couch and spilled every detail of the dinner blow-up, voice cracking when she recounted Marin's deliberate attempt to humiliate her. Tess's jaw tightened as she listened, crossing her arms over her chest, sharp frustration. "I've told you 100 times to stop letting all over you. She's mocked your Navy work for years, called your rescues reckless, your scars ugly, your whole ladylike, just to make herself look polished by comparison. This dinner stunt and a one-off joke. It's how..." Elara stared at tipped nail polish, twisting her hands together. She hated it. Tess was right. hated facing the truth that her sister's jabs were rooted in jealousy, not hard banter. Her phone buzzed on the couch between them. A text unknown number. The screen lighting to reveal a blurry, decades-old photograph attached. Two young men in faded navy dive gear leaned against a spattered patrol boat, way behind them. No caption, no name, just the single grainy image sent straight to her inbox. Alara recognized the faint familiar scar on one man's wrist. Jasper, or younger. Her breath caught in her throat as she zoomed in on the diver beside him, his face soft by age, the outline of a call sign patch barely visible on his uniform shoulder. Before she could process the photo fully, another text popped up on her screen, Hail. He'd slipped her his number earlier that evening, hoping to smooth any blisters. His message was short, heavy with doubt, a quiet admission Alara wanted to read. I never saw how bitter she gets about you until tonight. I'm starting to wonder if jealousy will ever fade, no matter how much I try to fix it. Alara set the phone face down on the couch, her heart sinking. The balance between the two sisters shifted irreparably. What had once been small private digs had exploded family-wide rift, and Hale's quiet uncertainty meant Marin's perfect wedding bow a permanent leak, one that might not be patched back to get down the aisle. Outside the apartment window, the Pacific roared against the shore, endless and unrelenting, mirroring the tangle I couldn't outrun. Alara barely slept that night, the blurry photo Jasper sent glowing behind her closed eyelids every time she drifted off. By 7 a.m., she was perched on Tessa's kitchen counter, laptop propped open between mugs of burnt black coffee. Both women scrolling through Washington Coastal Navy archives and local newspaper microfilm records from 1972. Tess knew the ins and outs of veteran public databases from her years working with a regional SAR support nonprofit, and she pulled up old storm logs, while Alara cross-referenced the names printed on faded patrol manifests. The summer storm of 72 had been dubbed Hurricane Surge 7 in military records, a brutal off-season tempest that swallowed fishing boats whole off Brine Harbor's jagged rock jetty. Buried halfway down a yellowed Coast Guard casualty report was a single entry. Diver Elias Thorne, call sign Riptide, lost at sea during civilian rescue operation, alongside dive partner Jasper Mercer. The words blurred under Alara's fingers as she read them again and again. The nickname she'd carried as a badge of her own survival was not some generic military label. It belonged to a man who'd drowned 54 years prior, a ghost Jasper had carried alone all this time. Tess closed the browser gently, placing a steady hand on Alara's forearm. That's why Uncle Jasper shut down the whole dinner table. Your sister didn't just tease. She mocked a dead veteran's memorial. Marin has zero clue how heavy SAR call signs land for people who've watched someone vanish beneath the wave. Alara grabbed her canvas military duffel from the closet, tucking a printed copy of the casualty slip inside. She needed to hear the full story from Jasper himself, not cold digital files, and she knew exactly where to find it. The Mercer family owned a weathered gray clapboard cottage tucked down a narrow gravel road along the northern end, a tiny home Jasper occupied year-round, instead of the large waterfront mansion Hale's parents kept for holiday gatherings. The drive wound past salt marshes streaked with seagrass, and when Alara pulled into the overgrown gravel drive, Jasper was sitting on his weathered wooden porch, polishing a dented vintage Navy dive helmet with a frayed collar. He did not seem surprised to see her step out of the car, just set the helmet down, and patted the empty spot beside him. Sat, sliding the printed archive sheet onto the porch planks between them with Jasper's gaze scanned the typed line, his jaw, and for a long stretch, the only noise was gulls crying overhead and water lapping against the dock at the bottom of his yard. Elias was my best friend since camp, he said at last, voice rough as ever. We requested paired dive assignments together for 3 days. When the hit, a fishing vessel with 3 teenage boys got trapped against the rocks. We split up to pull them free. A rogue wave slammed into Elias before I could reach him. I dragged all 3 to safety, but I never got to grab his. He rolled up his flannel sleeve to show the thick, silvery scar wrapping around his wrist, the same mark Alara had spotted in the old photo. That scar's from the rope I grabbed trying back. They pulled his gear out 3 days later. Everyone back then told me I could. But I've spent every summer since sitting here staring at inlet, replaying every second of that red head. Alara's throat burned tight. She understood that brand of survivor's guilt most. She'd watched a rookie swimmer nearly drown on her deployment. The reason she'd taken a medical discharge and never gone back to ocean rescues. She told Jasper a small piece of her own story, unhurried. And for the first time since rehearsal dinner, the weight between them softened, bound by shared grief for lives lost beneath churning salt water. Their quiet conversation shattered when a car tires crunched loudly in the driveway. Marin had tracked Alara down, Lila's sedan parked behind her planning van, both women storming up the porch steps before Alara could stand to leave. Marin's eyes flashed with unbridled rage the second she spotted the archive paper laid beside Jasper, instantly piecing together what Alara had come to learn. Are you serious? Marin shouted, hands balled and fists at her sides. You ran straight to Uncle Jasper to dig up some old sad story just to make me look terrible to the family? You're sabotaging my wedding on purpose for attention. Come here to hurt you, Alara shot back, swing. I came to apologize for unknowingly dragging Elias Murray into that dinner, and to understand why so hard. This isn't a weekend. Everything you do is to outshine me, Marin snapped, her voice echo across the empty inlet. You parade around your Navy trauma like it's a trophy to make everyone forget I'm the one this weekend. All you ever do is steal at work for. Lila stepped between the sisters, hand raised to calm the fight, but she only reinforced Marin's anger instead of bridging the gap. Alara, you should have stood from Jasper today. Marin's already stressed enough without you stirring up old family pain. For the first time in 30 years, Alara refused to shrink herself to smooth over Marin's tantrum. She folded the printed archive slip, put it back into her bag, ready on her sister. No trace of the usual guilty hesitation in their fights. I am not hiding my military service anymore to spare your fragile social ego. Vent that nickname. And I won't apologize for bearing it just because you thought it was funny to others. Marin's face turned crimson with humiliation and fury combined. She took a sharp step backward, jaw set hard as she delivered a threat that twisted cold. If you keep inserting yourself in the Mercer family's business and turning Uncle Jasper against me, I will uninvite from this wedding. Don't test me. She spun on her heel, stormed back to her van, Lila hurrying after her without a single glance back at Alara or Jasper. The screen door of the cottage slammed hard in their retreating figures, rattling the glass panes, and stacks of white embossed wedding invitation cards Jasper kept stacked on a side slid off the wood surface, scattering across the porch floor like discarded pieces of Marin's perfect constructed dream. Jasper bent slowly to gather the scattered wedding invitations, his knuckles stiff with age as he stacked the crisp white cardstock back into a neat pile. The sound of Marin's tires peeling out down the gravel road faded into the hum of distant waves, and he did not look up until the last trace of her car vanished around the salt marsh bend. He set the stack on the porch rail, then nodded for Alara to sit back down on the swing, his posture softer now that the rage-fueled confrontation was gone. I haven't told anyone the full story of Elias in decades, he admitted, his voice low enough only she could hear over the seagulls. My siblings begged me to let it rest when we were young. They said clinging to that loss would eat me alive. I buried every photo, every logbook, every medal tied to that rescue, and tried to pretend the name Riptide didn't carve a hole straight through my chest. I only sent you that old picture because I saw myself in you that night. Someone who carries the ocean's scars where everyone else can see polished ease. Alara leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees, and let him unpack every unspoken memory he'd locked away for 54 years. Elias had been the reckless, warm heart of their dive team. The one who cracked jokes mid-storm to calm rookie swimmers. The one who'd volunteered to take the call sign Riptide because he joked he could outrun any current the Pacific threw at them. On the day of the hurricane surge, he'd shoved Jasper out of the path of a 12-foot rogue wave, sacrificing his own harness line to push his partner clear of the jagged rock jet. Jasper had dragged 3 terrified teen fishermen to the patrol boat, screaming Elias's name into the churning gray water until his throat raw. But the currents had dragged his best friend down before rescue choppers arrived. Every time someone tossed that name around lightly, even as a throwaway joke, it felt like they were stepping on his grave. Jasper, brushing a thin layer of dust off his vintage dive helmet. Your sister didn't know the weight of it. That much I'll grant. But she didn't care to ask before she paraded your nickname out for cheap laughs at your expense. That's the part that stung worse than the memory itself. Alara sat with that truth heavy in her bones long after Jasper finished speaking. She understood Marin's ignorance, but she could no longer excuse the deliberate cruelty of staging public humiliation just to feel superior to her older sister. She thanked Jasper for sharing his, promised to keep Elias's story close, then left the cottage to grab lunch at a small waterfront cafe halfway back to her apartment, hoping to clear her head before facing any more family tension. She'd barely ordered a bowl of clam chowder when she heard Marin's sharp voice cut through the cafe's soft jazz background noise from the adjacent. Marin sat across from their mother, Lila, gesturing wildly with a glass of iced wine, unaware Alara was seated just a partition. Clara Mercer had popped into the cafe to pick up a pastry for Hale, and she'd paused to greet the 2 women, only to walk straight into Marin's unfiltered rant about Alara's supposed sabotage. She spent her whole life trying to out me, Marin complained loud enough for the whole dining area to. First Navy, then her work. Now she's cozying up to Uncle Jasper to turn my fiancé's entire family. She hates that I'm the one with the wedding, the nice, the stable life. She can't stand seeing. Clara's gentle demeanor hardened me, her brows drawing tight as she leaned forward to meet Marin's gaze. No polite buffer softening. I've watched Alara all weekend. She shrank into the background at the rehearsal dinner to avoid drawing attention, and she only spoke that nickname when you spent months planning a perfect Paul event, yet you chose to humiliate your own sister for a cheap laugh in front of her family before you ever stopped to ask what that word meant. Jasper. That's not her sabotage. That's your jealousy talking, and unkind, grateful, and deeply. Marin froze mid-rant, her face burning red as every nearby patron turned to glance. Lila rushed to defend her daughter, cutting Clara off before she continued, her tone desperate to diffuse the awkward public confrontation. "Clara, she's just overwhelmed with stress. Stress does not excuse," Clara replied firmly. She gave Marin one final disappointed look before grabbing her pastry bag and stepping out of the cafe with the word, leaving Marin seething and Lila defeated. Alara slipped out of the cafe through the side door before Marin spotted her, her chowder forgotten. Her phone buzzed minutes later with a long text from Hale, paragraphs thick with. He'd spoken with his mother Clara after she left the cafe, and she'd laid out every detail of Marin's bit. Hale admitted he'd ignored small flashes of his fiancée's jealousy for years, brushing them off as harmless sibling friction, but the rehearsal dinner blow-up and the cafe tirade had stripped away every excuse he'd clung to. He wrote that he couldn't build a marriage with someone who took pleasure in tearing down her own family's clout, and he needed space to process whether they could move forward the wedding at all. Alara's chest ached at his message. The rift had split the Mercer household in the middle. Clara and Jasper stood firmly on Alara's side, while Hale lingered in uncertainty, questioning the woman. When Alara texted Lila later that afternoon to check in, her mother's reply only beat. Lila wrote the thing came first, that Alara needed to step back and stop stirring up conflict, that Marin's feelings mattered more than Alara's to defend herself or leave. Her own mother had chosen Marin's comfort over pain once again, leaving Alara with no blood family left to rely on through the loss. Night fell over Brine Harbor, and Alara's phone lit up with a sharp, cold text sent direct to Marin's number. No attempt at gentle wise. "You may come to the reception only. You are uninvited for the ceremony itself. Don't show up to tomorrow morning. This is my day. And I won't let you ruin it with your obsession over Uncle Jasper's stories." Alara stared at this for a long time, the salt wind whipping at her apartment window, the irreversible shift heavy around her, the wedding or sacred moment. The walk down the aisle she'd once dreamed watching her sister take was lost her entirely, punished for a cruelty she never committed. The balance of power had tilted fully against Marin's family's eyes, yet her sister clung to control with every harsh boundary she threw down, blind to how much she stood to lose before the weekend ended. The text sat open on Alara's phone screen long after the sunset bled purple over the ocean. Uninvited from the ceremony, allowed only at the reception. The words stung sharper than any of Marin's previous jabs because they were final and official. Public demotion from sister to mere guest, stripped of every intimate role she'd once hoped to hold on her sister's wedding day. For 30 years, Alara had bent herself backward to love Marin quietly, to overlook her jealousy, to shrink her own achievements so Marin could shine brighter. She'd tolerated eye rolls at her military scars, jokes about her rough Navy past, and endless lectures from their mother about being the mature older sister. But this deliberate, exclusionary cut felt different. It was not a passing tantrum. It was Marin choosing pride over family, status over blood, and forcing Alara to finally confront the truth she'd spent decades avoiding. Tess showed up at Alara's beach apartment an hour later with a 6-pack of cold beer and a worn fleece blanket, letting herself in without knocking. She took one look at Alara's hollow expression and the glowing phone screen, then sank onto the couch with a heavy sigh. No gentle platitudes to soften the moment. "You're not going to beg her to let you in," Tess said firmly, handing over a beer. "Not this time. She spent years making you feel small so she could feel perfect, and now she's punishing you for having integrity. You don't owe her another ounce of your peace to prop up her fake fairy tale wet." Alara twisted the cap off the bottle, the cool glass biting into her palm, and stared out at the dark rolling waves. "I just always thought if I was quiet enough, good enough, never stole her spot, she'd finally stop resenting me. I wanted us to be normal sisters." "Normal sisters don't ban each other from their wedding ceremonies out of jealousy," Tess replied bluntly. "She's not fighting you. She's fighting the version of you that reminds her she's not as brave, not as resilient, not as grounded as she pretends to be. Your Navy past didn't break her perfect day. Her own cruel." Tess stayed long into the evening, talking Alara down from the old familiar urge to apologize for acting. They mapped out the next day. Alara would respect Marin's harsh boundary, skip the morning church ceremony entirely, and only attend the evening waterfront. No attempts to reconcile, no desperate bids for her sister's soul, no shrinking to make the room feel easier. For the first time in her adult life, Alara decided she would show up for herself instead of any. The next morning dawned bright and warm. The kind of pristine coastal day Marin had doubtless prayed for during months of wedding planning. While the church filled with guests and floral arrangements and soft wick, Alara drove alone to the quiet Veterans Memorial Dock at the northern edge of. It was a weathered, little-known pier tucked away from the tourists, lined with small bronze plaques honoring local service members' law. Including unassuming marker for a thorn, his name faded by decades of salt spray and suds. Jasper was there, leaning against the rail, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt instead of his usual flannel. A small velvet pouch tucked his pocket. He didn't seem surprised to see her, like he'd known she'd seek out quiet, sacred space instead of forcing herself into a hostile wedding. "I come here every end," Jasper softly, nodding toward Elias's plaque. "Used to hate this time of year. All the celebration, all the things. It always reminded me of the ending, Elias." He pulled the velvet pouch from his pocket and slid a drawstring, revealing a tarnished brass knave coin, its surface etched with a storm wave and the thing tied. 82. The metal was worn smooth from half a century of being tucked into pockets, gripped hard days, held through every quiet moment of grief Jasper had. "This Elias's," he said, pressing the coin in Lara's palm. He came on every dive. I pulled it from his ear after the surge. "I've never given anyone before, but you carry his call sign with respect. You carry the weight of ocean survival the same way he did. You deserve this more than any lot." Alara's breath caught as her fingers closed around the cool metal. It was heavy, tangible, a living piece of the history that had upended her entire weekend. She felt no pride, no victory, only a quiet, reverent responsibility to honor the name she'd once hated, the name that had tied her to a stranger. They stood together on the dock for over an hour, watched the tide roll in, speaking little but understanding everything. A handful of retired local Navy divers wandered by, old friends of Jasper's, and they greeted Alara like family once they learned her background and nickname. For the first time all weekend, Alara did like an outsider, didn't feel like a flawed, unpolished burden ruining someone's perfect day. She felt seen, respected, and at peace with us. Her phone vibred mid-conversation. "Can you meet me at the Harbor Park Pavilion before the reception? Please. I need to talk. No." Alara arrived 10 minutes later to find Hale facing the wooden planks, his third wedding suit crisp, but his shoulder exhaustion. The easy, carefree energy he'd carried all summer was gone, replaced with raw uncertainty and heartbreak. He didn't start with excuse defenses for Marin, truth. "I've been lying to myself for years," Hale admitted, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "I told myself Marin's fire was passion, her competitiveness was ambition, her jealous sibling tension. But I watched her manipulate your mom, mock your service, and ban you from your own sister's ceremony just to protect her ego. I'm supposed to marry someone kind, someone compassionate, if that's her." He paused, his voice softening with desperation. "I don't want a family or this wedding, but I can't spend my life walking on her temper. I just need to know, is there any way this can be fixed?" Alara looked him straight in the eye, calm and unshaken, no longer clinging to the hope of peaceful family resolution. "Fix isn't my job, Hale, it's hers. I'm done apologizing, comfortable." Hale left the pavilion defeated, his future steadily in the balance, while Alara turned back toward the memorial dock to retrieve her things. She felt closure in that quiet moment, shift in her heart. She no longer craved Marin's validation, or begged for her mother's favor, no longer shrank her truth for anyone's social peace. Her priority was no longer saving Marin's perfect wedding, it was honoring herself, honoring Elias's memory, her own peace. But the quiet day hidden for long. Down the shoreline, partially hidden of blooming beach roses, Marin stood frozen ivory wedding reception, phone raised, camera lens locked Alara and Jasper. She'd slipped away from reception photos early, desperate to catch proof of what she'd convinced herself was betrayal. In her frame, it didn't look like grief, veteran kinship. It looked like Alara stealing her spotlight, stealing her perfect day. His thumb hovered over the send button, her jaw tight with rage and wounded pride, ready to forward the photo to their mother and every guest in the wedding group with a single damning caption. The truce Alara had quietly chosen to up was about to be shattered entirely, by a would never let her heal in peace. Marin's thumb hung suspended over her phone's screen for 3 long, burning seconds. The photo was perfect for her narrative, Alara standing shoulder to shoulder with Jasper, heads tilted in quiet reverence, the veteran's coin glinting faintly in Alara's palm. To every wedding guest scrolling their group chat, it would look like Alara had spent the entire wedding morning cozying up to the most respected elder in the Mercer family, scheming to turn everyone against the bride on her own wedding day. It was the proof Marin had been craving, tangible ammunition to paint her sister as a calculated spotlight-stealing villain, yet something stopped her from hitting send. It was not guilt, not kindness, but the quiet, unshakable doubt flickering in the back of her mind, Hale's cold distance, Clara's unmasked disappointment, Jasper's unyielding silence toward her all weekend. For the first time in her life, Marin realized her usual tactics wouldn't work. A petty group chat smear wouldn't win back the room's favor. It would only confirm what everyone was already starting to believe, that the bride was bitter, unreasonable, and incapable of letting go of a childish grudge. With a sharp, frustrated hug, she lowered her phone, deleted the unfinished caption, and turned on her heel to march back toward the waterfront reception venue. She would not fight dirty from the shadows. She would settle this face to face, in front of every family member and guest, and force everyone to see things her way. If Alara wanted to steal her spotlight, Marin would turn the entire wedding celebration into a decisive confrontation. The evening's final wedding dinner was held in the venue's glass-walled ocean ball, strung with warm fairy lights and lined with white linen tables overlooking the tide. Soft jazz hummed through the speakers, waiters circulated with trays of champagne and chilled seafood, and guests laughed and mingled, unaware the night was about to unravel completely. Alara arrived fashionably late, dressed simply in a muted blue sunset, Elias's challenge coin tucked safely inside her. She had no intention of being, no desire to disrupt. She only planned to stay for, offer her quiet congratulations, and slip away before any more conflict could. Her peaceful plan shattered the second she stepped through the ballroom. Marin was already standing center of them, her ivory reception gown glowing under the overhead lights, her gaze locking instantly onto Alara the moment she crossed the threshold. All the sweet, gracious bride energy she'd curated for months vanished in an instant, replaced with sharp, unbridled resentment. She excused herself from a group of chatting relatives and walked straight to Alara, her steps deliberate and drawing every eye in the room. Lila hurried to her, eyes wide, already mouthing quiet pleas for Marin to stay calm and keep the night civil. Hale stood frozen by the bar, his glass of whiskey halfway to lips, his face tight with He knew what was coming. The final fight they'd all been avoiding since the rehearsal dinner was no longer. "You have some nerve showing up here after what you did this morning," Marin said, her voice loud enough to hush those chatter. The music faded into back noise, every guest's attention fixed on the tense standoff unfolding in the center. Alara tipped her head, calm and unruffled. "I was invited to the Marin. I can't break you. I haven't done anything tonight. Ruined it?" Marin laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound cutting through. "You spent the entire morning with Uncle Jasper, bonding over some decades-old Navy ghost story, turning my fiancé's family against me while I was getting ready. You think I don't see what you're doing? You've always hated that I got perfect life, perfect wedding, perfect future. You've spent our whole lives competing with me, and now you're finally desperate enough to sabotage my marriage to..." The words hung in the air, shocking every guest within earshot. Lila stepped forward quickly, hands outstretched to diffuse the scene, her voice firm. "Mom, that's enough. Inappropriate. Everyone's watching now." "No," Jasper said, standing slowly from his table in the back of the room. His voice was graveled, but it carried across the silent ballroom with unshakable authority. Every head turned toward him as he walked forward, his withered frame steady, his gaze locked on Marin. "Don't let her drop it. Finish." Marin's confidence wavered for the first time all night. She'd expected back from Alara, defense from her mother, and from Hale. She'd never expected Jasper, the quiet, reserved veteran who rarely spoke in family matters, to demand she speak her one. Jasper stopped a few feet away from her, his tone but unflinching. No anger, only quiet gravity. "You claim sabotaging you. You claim she's competing with your perfect life. Before you stand here and accuse one of all these people, you owe everyone the full story. Tell them why you mocked the name Riptide at the rehearsal dinner. Tell them why you banned your sister from your ceremony. Tell you afraid of." The pressure of every staring eye cracked over Marin all at once. Her polished macked completely, every layer of poise and perfection stripping away to reveal the raw, insecure jealousy she'd hidden for years. Shook as she spoke, longer sharp with anger, but thin and wounded and honest. "I'm afraid of always being second better," she burst out, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "She joined the Navy, she saved lives, she has scars and stories and courage that in our family has. Everyone always looks at her like she's stronger, braver, more real than me. I plan weddings for a living, I curate perfect days for other people, and all I ever get is shallow praise. She does something extraordinary and admires her endlessly. I hate that I'm just the pretty, polished little sister with no grit, no back stories to tell." A stunned silence fell over the ballroom. Lila's face crumpled with guilt, finally seeing the damage her lifelong favoritism and casual dismissal had caused. His shoulders slumped in defeat, every last illusion about his fiancé's grumbling away. Marin's voice cracked, tears stinging her eyes as a test of her truth. "I mocked her nickname because it was one more thing felt bigger than me. I banned her from my ceremony because I couldn't stand standing up there knowing everyone was comparing a perfect, empty wedding day to her real, hard, brave life. I wasn't punishing her. I was punishing her as good." Clara Mercer stepped forward then, her tone gentle but firm, no longer willing to let the moment pass without accountability. "Jealousy is human, Mom. Cruelty is a choice. You didn't just tease your sister. You mocked a fallen veteran's memory to make yourself feel superior. You hurt two people who spent their lives saving others. All purity." Hale crossed the room slowly, stopped in front of his fiancée, expression solemn and final. He spent months overlooking her flaws, making excuses for her temper, clinging to the vision of their perfect future. No longer pretend. I can't marry you like this, Hale said quietly, words echoing through the silent ballroom. I don't want a life where you resent them to prop up your own ego. I don't want a marriage built on jealousy and cruelty and fear. If we're going to walk down the aisle tomorrow, you need to apologize. Not a quick, polite excuse. A real, honest apology to Alara and to Jasper for the man who died saving lives. Every guest held their breath. The fairy lights glinted off the glass windows, the ocean waves crashing softly outside, waiting for the bride's final choice. Maren stood frozen in the center of the room, tears streaming down her cheeks, her perfect wedding facade shattered beyond repair. For the first time in her adult life, she had no script, no charm, no social grace to hide behind. All she had was a choice. Swallow her pride and make amends, or lose years building entirely. The ballroom held its breath for a long, fragile beat. Soft jazz lingered in the background, forgotten, while the ocean's steady crash filtered through the glass walls, a quiet reminder of what riptide had always meant. Strength, sacrifice, and currents too strong for pride to outrun. Maren stood in the center of every staring guest, her makeup streaked with silent tears, her perfect wedding persona completely fallen away. There were no more excuses, no more playful denials, no more shifting blame to Alara's sensitivity or wedding stress. Every cruel choice she'd made all weekend stood bare and unvarnished, and Hale's ultimatum hung over her like a final, unescapable tie. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, raw, and unguarded. Nothing like the sharp, polished tone she'd used all weekend to cut down her sister. I'm sorry, Maren whispered first to Alara, her eyes locked only on her sister's face. No audience performativity left. I'm sorry I spent our whole lives competing with you. I'm sorry I mocked your Navy service, your nickname, the courage I've always been too scared to admit you have. I tried to humiliate you at the rehearsal dinner to make myself feel big, and that was cruel and unforgivable. You never once deserved the way I treated you. She paused, swallowing hard before turning toward Jasper, her posture softening into genuine reverence. No trace of defensiveness remained. And I'm sorry to you. I had no idea what that name carried. No idea I was mocking a fallen veteran who died saving lives. I disrespected your grief and your best friend's memory out of pure, ignorant jealousy, and there is no excuse for that. I'm so sorry for the pain I brought back after you spent decades trying. The room exhaled all at once, a quiet collective release of tension that had simmering since the first night of the weekend. Guests shifted in their seats, murmurs soft and sympathetic rather than judgmental. Lila's shoulders shook with quiet, finally confronting how her lifelong pattern of coddling Maren and minimizing Alara's struggles had warped their sisterhood for decades. Hale's rigid posture relaxed, the hard edge of disappointment softening into caution. Not for a perfect, but for a honest. Alara stepped forward slowly. No triumphant, no urge to claim victory. She'd spent 30 years craving this elegy, begging for her sister to see pain. But now that it was here, she felt only gentle. She did not rush to hug Maren, did not pretend everything was sudden. She simply nodded, calm and steady, setting the firm boundary she'd spent her whole life afraid to. I accept your apology, Alara clearly, but I need you to know things can't go back to her. I'm done shrinking myself to make you comfortable. I'm done hiding my past, my scars or my strength so you never have to feel insecure. We can be sisters, but we'll never go back to me being your quiet, invisible backdrop. That part of us. Maren nodded with argument, tears streaming, finally mature enough to understand accountability did not erase harm. For the first in her life, she did not demand forgiveness, did not expect immediate repair, simply chose to sit with the weight of it. The rest of the night unfolded with quiet, unpace. The confrontation dissolved into soft, guests returning to their mean laughter, the tension lifting from the ballroom like a storm path. The next morning, the wedding proceeded simply and sincerely, stripped of Maren's obsessive. She walked down the aisle without the desperate need to everyone, her gaze fixed on Hale, and exchanged quiet, heartfelt vows rooted in honesty rather than glamour. To her word, Alara attended the full ceremony now that it softened, sitting beside Tess and Row. She didn't seek attention, did not feel the moment, simply bore quiet witness to her sister's new beginning. The sister who'd once banned her was now to have her there, no longer viewing Alara's presence as a threat. During the evening reception, once the formal dance and toasts had ended, Jasper found Alara standing alone on U's back deck, staring out at the ocean. The fairy lights glowed behind them, the party halfly inside, and the salt wind brushed gently over their faces, calm and forgiving chaos. You know, Jasper said quietly, leaning against the railing beside her, Elias always said Riptide name for destruction. It was a name for people who pull others out of the current, people who survive the storms to someone else. He held up his beer bottle, quiet veteran's toast. He would have been proud the name you. Alara smiled, the first fully unguarded, unforced weekend. She pulled Elias's challenge coin from her clutch, twisting it between her fingers, no longer carrying it as a heaven of borrowed grief, but as an honor, a legacy, a reminder that strength and exist. I used to hate this name, she admitted. I thought it was rough, too loud, for polite society. I spent years trying to outrun it, outrun my service, outrun the storms I survived. I finally get it now. I don't need to be small to be worthy or part of me. Nearby, Lila approached slowly, hesitant, characteristically humble, no longer rushing to smooth over conflict or take sides. She stood beside Alara, gazing out at the water, her voice soft with regret. I offered peace over truth, Lila confessed quietly. I downplayed your navy work, your pain, not because I didn't love you, because I was scared. Scared of the ocean taking you, how hard your life was. Scared to face how brave you were while I hid behind safe, quiet normalcy. I let Marin's jealousy grow because I didn't want to fix the hard things. I'm so sorry I made all these years. Alara nodded, her heart softening but not breaking her new boundaries. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to old patterns. It meant letting go of the pain so long. Inside the reception hall, Aaron danced slowly with Hale, her head resting on his shoulder, no longer worried about perfect photos or guest opinions. She'd lost session with polished perfection, gained a quiet humility whole life lacking. She glanced across the room at Alara, jealousy left in her gaze, only gratitude for her sister's grace, for the second chance she'd been given to grow into a person, a better wife. As the night faded into calm coastal darkness, the chaotic, fractured family of the rehearsal dinner was gone. In its place, something quieter, true, and far more durable. Boundaries, honesty, and respect. The nickname Riptide no belonged only to a fallen veteran or a Navy swimmer's embarrassing label. It belonged to every person in that family who'd survived a storm, faced their flaws, chosen to grow instead of break. Slipped the challenge coin into her pocket, turned toward the glowing reception lights, and walked forward without shrinking, without apologizing for who she was. Her old life of quiet self-erasure was over. In its place, she'd finally found her peace, steady, energetic, and entirely her own.